All-Merciful, the All-Compassionate. Fatima al-Zahra, the daughter of the Prophet, peace be on them, is to have thus related an event. My father, the Prophet of Allah, came to my house one day and said to me, "Peace be on you, Fatima." I replied, "And upon you be peace." Then he said, "I feel weakness in my body." I said, Allah protects you from weakness, father." He said, "Fatima, please bring the Yemeni cloak and cover me with it." So I brought the Yemeni cloak and covered him with it. Then I looked at him and saw that his face was shining like a full moon with its glory and splendor. After a while, my son Hassan came in and said, "Peace be on you, mother." I replied, "And upon you peace, O light of my eyes, the delight of my heart." He then said, "Mother, I smell a fragrance so sweet and so pure as that of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, your grandfather is lying underneath the cloak." Hassan went near the cloak and said, "Peace be on you, my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my son and the master of my fountain. Go through. You are given the permission to enter." So Hassan entered the cloak with him. After a while, my son Hussein came in and said, "Peace be on you, mother." I replied, "And upon you peace, O light of my eyes and the delight of my heart." He then said, "Mother, I smell a sweet fragrance like that of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, your grandfather and your brother are lying underneath the cloak." Hussein stepped towards the cloak and said, "Peace be on you, my grandfather, the chosen of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my son and the interceder of my followers. You are given the permission to enter." So Hussein entered the cloak with them. After a while, Abu Hassan Ali bin Abi Talib came in and said, "Peace be on you, O daughter of the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "And upon you peace, O father of Hassan and the commander of the faithful." He then said, "Fatima, I smell a sweet fragrance like that of my brother, my cousin, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, he is underneath the cloak with your two sons." So Ali went near the cloak and said, "Peace be on you, Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my brother, my legatee, my successor, and my standard bearer. You are given the permission to enter." So Ali entered the cloak with them. Then I stepped forward and said, "Peace be on you, my father, O Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my daughter, O part of myself. You are given the permission to enter." So I entered the cloak with them. Getting together underneath the cloak, my father, the Prophet of Allah, held the two ends of the cloak and raised his right hand towards the heavens and prayed, "O Allah, these are the people of my household, Ahlul Bayt. They are my confidants and my supporters. Their flesh is my flesh, and their blood is my blood. Whoever hurts them hurts me too. Whoever displeases them displeases me too. I am at war with those at war with them. I am at peace with those at peace with them. I am the enemy of their enemies, and I am the friend of their friends. They are from me, and I am from them. O Allah, bestow your blessings, benevolence, forgiveness, and your pleasure upon me and upon them, and keep away impurity from them, and keep them thoroughly pure." Then the Lord Almighty Allah said, "O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for the love of these five lying underneath the cloak." Jibreel, the trusted angel, asked, "Who are under the cloak?" The Almighty answered, "They are the household of the Prophet and the assets of prophethood. They are Fatima, her father, her husband, and her two sons." Jibreel said, "O Lord, may I fly to earth to be the sixth of them?" Allah replied, yes, you are given the permission. Jibreel the trusted landed near them and said, peace be on you, O Prophet of Allah. The All-Highest conveys his peace on you and his greetings and says, by my honor and glory, O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for your sake and love. God has given me permission to enter the cloak with you. May I join you, O Prophet of Allah? The Prophet replied, and peace be on you, O trusted bearer of Allah's revelations. You are granted the permission. So Jibreel entered the cloak with us and said to my father, Allah sends his revelations to you. Verily, Allah's desire is to keep away blemish from you, O people of household Ahlul Bayt, and purify you with the perfect purification. Then Ali said to my father, O Prophet of Allah, tell me what significance has Allah given for getting together underneath this cloak? The Prophet replied, by him who rightfully appointed me a prophet and chose me a messenger for the salvation of the mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, Allah will bestow on them His blessings and mercy. Angels will encircle them, asking Allah the remission of their sins until the assembly disperse. So Ali said, verily by the Lord of Kaaba, we and our followers are the winners. Then my father replied, by him who rightfully appointed me a prophet and chose me a messenger for the salvation of the mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, there shall remain none grieved, but Allah will remove his grief. There shall remain none distressed, but Allah will dispel his distress. There shall remain none wish-seeker, but Allah will grant his wish. Ali happily said, verily by the Lord of Kaaba, we and our followers are the winners and the blessed, in this world and the next. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها كذبت ثمود بتقواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم رسول الله ناقة الله فسقياها فكذبوه فعقروها فدمدم عليهم ربهم بذنبهم فسواها ولا يخاف عقباها صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you, Hassan. Salawat Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So as you can see tonight, we have a little bit special setup for you guys. Inshallah, Maulana will do like a little half or 1/3 majlis, and then we'll go into a Q&A session with Maulana, inshallah, because he wanted to take an opportunity to meet everyone. And to answer any questions that were on your minds before he leaves. So inshallah, that's going to be the format for today. Inshallah, we'll do like a half majlis and then a half Q&A session. Now, without further ado, I'd like to request Maulana to take the members. Salawat for Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من اللعين الغوي الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين، والصلاة والسلام على خيرة خلق الله أجمعين، وهو رحمة الله للعالمين، وهو ابن القاسم المصطفى محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الميامين المهديين المعصومين المظلومين المقتولين، ولعنة الله دائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. So, I think we have until about 8:30, 8:35, right? Get ready for namaz, give or take about that. So, I had a different idea today. So we'll, inshallah, we'll start with, of course, recollecting the details of the day of the 11th and the 12th of Muharram, the Masa'ib. And then I want to also discuss a little bit about where these details come from. Where do these details come from? Is this something based on a story? Is it something, what is it based on? So I brought a couple of books here today, and then I will also read a poem to you in Arabic and translate it. And then in the remainder of the time, we'll inshallah have a Q&A, inshallah. So, a lot of the events that happened after the Shahadat of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam are narrated to us in a famous ziyarah known as Ziyarat al-Nahiya al-Muqaddasa. Now, this Ziyarat Nahiya al-Muqaddasa is attributed to the 12th Imam. There is a discussion about whether it is authentic or not. There is a discussion about it. But, in my estimation, it is a very strong ziyarah for different reasons. One, because Ibn Mashhadi narrates it in his Kitab al-Mazar al-Qadim, one of the great scholars who did not take narrations from everywhere. He was very careful in the narrations that he included in that book known as Kitab al-Mazar. And he attributes a ziyarah to the 12th Imams. Then we have a very similar ziyarah narrated by Shaykh al-Mufid and others, also attributed to the 12th Imam, but then there is also an attribution to Sharif al-Murtada, who is a brother of Sharif al-Radi, the compiler of Nahj al-Balagha. But it doesn't say that Sharif al-Murtada wrote the ziyarah. What it says is he visited Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura and recited this particular ziyarah on the day of Ashura. Nevertheless, this ziyarah is very, 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 very powerful. It is very emotional. It has lines in there that will break your heart. For example, we say, وَلَمْ أَكُنْ لِمَنْ حَارَبَكَ مُحَارِبًا, that, O Imam, this is Imam Zaman speaking to Imam Hussein, I was not there to fight the one who fought you. وَلِمَنْ نَصَبَ لَكَ الْعَدَوَاتَ مُنَاسِبًا, nor was I there to show enmity to the ones who showed enmity to you. فَلَا أَنْدُبَنَّكَ سَبَاحًا وَمَسَاءً, and now I shall mourn for you morning and night. Morning and night. So the 12th Imam will mourn for his grandfather Hussein in the morning and the night, meaning constantly. وَلَأَبْكِيَنَّ لَكَ بَدَلَ دُمُوعِ دَمَا, and this is a common theme in Arabic literature, and I will mourn tears of blood. This is very common in the Arabic literature, that when you cry for someone so much, we say you cry tears of blood. There are two interpretations for this, Azadar Hussein, Mu'mineen. One is Imam Zaman literally is crying tears for blood, and the other one, it is metaphorical that the Imam is crying tears for blood. However, what we read even from Imam Rida is not unusual. I mean, it would not be unusual to say that the Imam had some blood in his tears or coming from his eye cavity, because it says in the Yom al-Hussein, akraha jufnunana, right? So that on the day of Hussein, our eyelids tear, from the word karaha, that we cry so much that our eyelids are swollen up. So the Imams are in such an intense state of aza and recollection over the musibat of their grandfather Hussein ibn Ali, that, it has some physical manifestations on their face. Hasratan alayka wa ta'assufan ala ma dahak. So the Imam then says, I shall cry for you, mourn for you in a state of grief. Hasratan alayka wa ta'assufan ala ma dahak. Knowing what you underwent. Ta'assufan, with great sorrow, ala ma dahak, over what transpired, over what happened to you. Right? Dahak yani, dahahu idha asabahu dahiya. Dahiya is a calamity. The calamity that befell you, O Abu Abdullah, I'm going to mourn for the rest of my life. تَلَحُّفًا حَتَّى أَمُوتُ بِلُوعَةِ الْمُصَابِ. And I'm going to pant when I grieve for you. That I'm not only going to cry for you, Ya Abu Abdullah, but I'm going to pant. تَلَحُّفًا. I'm going to, meaning it's, I can't control my crying. And I'm going to do this until I die from grief. Hatta amutu bi lo'atil musab. Right? Lo'atul musab, meaning that I will be like in an indescribable amount of pain over you, Ya Abu Abdullah. And that's why I mentioned to you in the earlier nights that one of the secrets to get to know, or not secrets, one of the best proven ways to establish a relationship with the Imam of the time is through the remembrance and love of Hussein ibn Ali, and through remembering the musibah of Hussein ibn Ali. Salamullahi alayhi. So lo'atul musab, a is a kind of agony of the heart. Alam min hub. It's like an injury that you get because you love someone. So when you love someone so much, to lose that person, and then especially as he describes how Shimr sat on his chest and held his beard and all of these things, Imam al-Zaman narrates all of these things to us in the ziyarah, as I related on the day of the 10th of Muharram. Knowing these things, right, and then describing the state of the women and all of these things, clearly, it's a very profound experience, the day of Ashura. It's very profound. It's not a light day to take. وَغُصَّةَ الْإِكْتِئَابِ. And I'm going to choke in a state of sadness. Ikti'ab, he says. So my dear mu'mineen, although this may be 2 days after the day of Ashura, the sadness of Ahlul Bayt never goes away. In fact, our great ulama, someone like Sheikh Abdullah al-Mamaqani in his Mir'atul Rashad, one of our great, very important scholars of Ilm al-Hadith and Akhlaq, he wrote a very beautiful book which was a wasiyat for his children. In this wasiyah, or this will that he gave to his children, what does he say in this? I'll narrate this to you, my dear brothers and sisters, tonight. He says in this will, "Oh my son, I advise you." Now this is not a nobody saying, this is one of the great maraja of Qom, one of the great ulama of the past. He died, Sahib Tanqi al-Maqal, he wrote many books on Rijal al-Hadith, and was a grand scholar of knowledge and Hadith and history and spirituality. He tells his son, "Ya Bunayya," he says, "Oh my son, I advise you to remember the death of Hussein ibn Ali fi kulli yawm, every day. And I advise you to gather your family together and to narrate to them the maqtal of Hussein ibn Ali every single day, even if preparations are not made for a majlis to occur. Every single day to have some mention Why do you think we raise our babies and our children that before they take a sip of Hussein to say Assalamu alayka ya Aba, a sip of water to say Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah? Even this much, right? That we remember his thirst before we even drink something. This is not culture, this is not something that was handed down from some, I don't know, Sufi Pir or something in Iran or Uzbekistan or Pakistan or something. No. But this is the practice of Al-Imamiyya Al-Ithna Ashariya. This is a practice of the 12 Shia on the sound basis of our great scholars, not on the basis of khurafat, not on the basis of inventions, not on the basis of they called old wives' tales. No. This is what our deen is, because there's a spiritual secret to this. There's a great reward to this. It softens the heart. And when the heart is softened, it's in a better state to worship Allah. It's in a better state to do istighfar. It's in a better state to do tawbah. It's in a better state to be a better human being. So these are some important things. What does the Imam say? Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu ala maqtu' al-wateen, right? Peace be upon the severed jugular vein. Assalamu ala ra's al-marfu'. Peace be upon the head that is lifted up. And then we have traditions, for example, from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, Lama Durriba al-Husayn ibn Ali bis-sayf, when Hussein was hit with the sword and they rushed to remove his head. This is from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Nada munadun min qibali Rabbil Izzah tabaraka wa ta'ala min butnan al-arsh. That a cry was heard, meaning an unknown cry, from the area of the throne of God, meaning from the heavenly realm. An unknown cry was heard. فقال ألا أيتها الأمة المتحيرة الظالمة. Oh, this misguided, dark ummah and community. بعد نبيها لا وفقكم الله لا أضحى ولا فطر. It's very interesting that you will never have the blessing of the two Eids again. You will celebrate them, but you will always remember on this day, you will not have the complete blessings of this because of what you have done to Hussein ibn Ali. And that's why Dua Nudba is mustahab when? The 4 Eids, right? 2 of them are what? Mu'mineen. Eid al-Fitr wal-Adha. Dua Nudba is the supplication of mourning. Nudba means to mourn, to grieve. Over what? What does Imam Zaman say in there, right? Qutila man qutil, subiya man subiya. Killed is the one that was killed, and imprisoned, meaning in reference to the women were imprisoned and taken as prisoners. Ayn al-Hasan wal-Husayn. This is the supplication of Sahib al-Zaman, which is mustahab to recite on Eid. That even on Eid we will begin with the azah of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. So, and all of this will continue until the rising of the Qa'im min Ali Muhammad, because only then, as the A'imma tell us, can any healing begin for the hearts of the mu'mineen. There can be no shifa and healing for the broken heart over the musibah of Hussein until the dhuhur of the Imam of our time, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. Khawarizmi reports that after they killed the Imam, there was a red wind, Rihun Hamra. There was a red wind that came over the horizon. No one could see anything. Why? Because Rasulullah has told us that the killer of Hussein shall be put into a box of hell, and half of the entire fire of hell, of every sin that has ever been committed, of every murder that has ever been committed, half of this entire hell will be for that single person that executed Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Nisfu adhab ahl al-nar. Nisf, half. Can you imagine in the history of humanity, this is the consequences of the butchering of Hussein ibn Ali. Because it's what it is. It's the use of the word dhabh, right? I'm not using words that are inappropriate. This is the kalam of Ahlul Bayt. People sometimes, because they're not from the Arab tradition, they don't know what the actual history is. This is the words that the hadith uses to describe the masaib and the maqtal of Abu Abdullah. When I use that word, I'm not trying to make people cry extra or put masalas on top. This is what has been narrated to us in the books of ahadith and the traditions that our Maraja themselves relate in Najaf on the day of Ashura and in the Ayam Azad. And the Ziyarat Nahiya continues, where the messenger of death or someone comes to Medina to deliver the news of Hussein, and he comes to the grave of the Prophet and says, Qutila sibtuka wa fatak, Ya Rasulullah, your grandson has been killed. وَسُبِيَتْ بَعْدَ ذَرَارِيكَ, and your family has been taken prisoner now. وَاسْتُبِحَ أَهْلُكَ وَهِمَاكَ, and your progeny have now been made halal. Ustubiha, from ibaha. This language is very powerful, mu'mineen, to think. Istubiha ahluka wa himak, that what was haram has been made halal. They have been made halal to be taken prisoner. Istubiha, from the word also related to the word mubah, that which is halal, allowed, they have made it. It's from the word istaf'ala. The Arabic language is very important to understand what Imam Zaman is saying here. وَوَقَعَ الْمَحْذُورِ بِعَثْرَتِكَ وَذَوِيكَ, and calamity has now befallen your family. فَأَنْزَعَجَ الرَّسُولُ وَبَكَى قَلْبَهُ الْمَهُولِ, and the Prophet becomes so distressed and his heart is palpitating in a state of terror. And the angels begin to come to give condolences to the Prophet. وَفُجِعَتْ بِكَ أُمَّكَ زَهْرَاء, and your mother is in a state of complete calamity over you, in complete shambles over you. Why? Why, mu'mineen? Because we read in a famous poem, right? We read in a very, very, very famous poem. I don't want to continue because I know this. We will have a Q&A now, but I'll just narrate this to you and then narrate the details of the burial of Imam Hussein. There's a very famous poem in the Majlis of Imam Rida that describes the moment when Sayyidah Zahra sees the body of her son for the very first time. Fatima qumi, oh Fatima, get up. Right, Da'b al-Khuzai, this is in the Majlis of Imam Rida with Da'b al-Khuzai. The Arab, of course, they know the poem, it is very famous among them. Fatima qumi, wandubi, oh Fatima, get up. The time has come to cry now. Why? Because your Hussein is laying there at the Shat of the Furat. That your Hussein is laying there alone. Bishat Furati. Your Hussein is there alone. Atshanan. Thirsty. Alone. وَإِذَا لَطَمَ فَاطِمَةَ خَدْ عَنْدَهُ, and when Fatima comes, she begins to hid her face. This is in the Majlis of Imam Rida. It's a very famous Arabic poem. Mu'mineen, we're not taking for hyperbole and mubalagha here. When Fatima comes, she begins to slap her face. إِذَا لَطَمَتِ الْخِدْ فَاطِمَةَ عِنْدَهُ وَأَجْرَيْتِ دَمَعَ الْعَيْنِ فِي الْوَجِنَاتِ, and her tears begin to fall down her face. This is the musibah in the majlis of Azab Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. And the narration says the Imam began to weep over and over as the Sahabi was reciting. Ja'bal al-Khuzai, the famous Arab poet, the Sha'ir of that time, was reciting this, and the Imam turned to him and said, Naqatat الروح القدوس من لسانك يا جعبل. Nataqat, meaning the Holy Spirit has begun speaking from your tongue. Ya Jabal, this is not your words. This is the words of Ruh al-Quddus, meaning Jibraeel. That Jibraeel has revealed in that moment, Ya Jabal, when you're describing this hitting of the face, Fatima hitting her face and her eyes. وجريتي دمع العين في الوجنات, and your tears fall, describing Sayyidah Zahra's tears, and your tears fall on your face. This is a kalam of Jibraeel alayhi salam. This is what the Imam means, that the Holy Spirit has spoken from your tongue. This is very famous among the ulama. This is how they understand the musibah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And then we go on to read that Umar ibn Sa'd decided to begin the journey to Kufa on the second day, but the body's laid there. So, we have many narrations here. This is the narration of Sayyid Bahr al-Ulum, one of the great Marajan ulama of Najaf, and Allama Zanjani. I've taken from their books, which is based on the earliest sources of history, where Imam Zain al-Abidin would return. Because only a Ma'soom can bury the Ma'soom and do the ghusl of the Ma'soom. So Bani Asad tells Imam Sajjad that we have now come upon the bodies of the Hashemites. What do we do with Hussein, with his son, with his nephew, with his Ansar now? At this point, imagine the emotions of Imam Zain al-Abidin. He begins crying and he says, Wa abata, wa abata. Imam is just crying, saying, Wa abata, wa abata. With your death, the vile enemies have become happy. قرة العيون الشامتين يا أبتا. بقتلك فرحت بنو أمية. By your death, Banu Umayyah has become happy. يا أبتا بعد طال حزننا. That after your death, طال حزننا. Our sadness is too much now. طال. After your death. This is a kalam of Imam Zain al-Abidin. And then some report that he wrote on the grave, he takes the body of Imam al-Hussein, he places it in his grave, and I'll narrate to you some of what he said there. Just so that there's no one says that, things are added and, extra things, What does the Imam say, alayhi salam? He comes upon the body of his father, and he begins to bury him, and he asks for his head, and he comes upon him, and he says, oh yeah, here we are. So he comes upon him. These are the final words. The riwayah states that he lowered his father's body into the grave. This is the headless body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, because the head was returned later. And his eyes filled with tears. وَوَضَعَ خَدُّهُ عَلَى نَهْرِ الشَّرِيفِ. He took his cheek and put it on the stump of his neck, because it's just a top. This is what is written. This is the history as it's written. This is not from here and there. From Maraj al-Kiram. وَهُوَ يَبْكِي وَيَقُولُ طُوبَى لِلْأَرْضِ. Blessed is now the earth that is going to contain you. And now we know for 1400 years we would be, of course, praying and knowing that earth is Mubarak, right? The Imam says, blessed now is this earth, right? تَدَمَّنَتْ جَسَدَكَ الطَّاهِرِ. It has now taken possession and guaranteeing, that it's taken in your blessed body. وَأَمَّا الدُّنْيَا بَعْدَكَ مُظْلِمًا. After you, this world is dark, oh my father. يَا وَأَمَّا الْآخِرَةِ وَبِنُورِكْ مُشْرِقًا. But the akhirat is giving its light by you, O my father. أَمَّا الْحُزْنُ فَسَرْمَدًا. As for my sadness, it is endless, O my father. وَأَمَّا اللَّيْلُ فَمَسَحَّدْ. And as for the night, it just seems like it never ends. It just continues to be dark. Until the point in which God chooses to take us back to Him. وَعَلَيْكَ مِنِّي سَلَامْ يَبْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. Peace be upon you, O the son of the Messenger of Allah, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. He then took his finger and he wrote on the grave of Hussein ibn Ali, Mu'mineen. What does he write? Shall we narrate? We will conclude just on this one jumla is kafi for this ziyarat majlis. I will narrate to you, let this be seared in your mind. In the way Imam wrote this on the grave, let this be seared in your qalb, what the Imam has written. قَتَلُوهُ عَطْشَانًا غَرِيبًا. That he was killed, they killed him rather, قَتَلُوهُ عَطْشَانًا غَرِيبًا. They killed him while he was thirsty and alone. And the Imam wrote this on the grave of his father. This is the tragedy of Al-Hussein ibn Ali salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. So inshallah ta'ala, after this day, don't stop coming for Ayam Azza Mu'mineen. Let you not be the Muharram Muslims, Muharram Shia. If there's any opportunity to remember Hussein and Ahlul Bayt salamullahi alayhim, take that opportunity, whether it be a good day, Ayam sadness, the days of sadness or the days of happiness, take that opportunity. Because every single one of these opportunities will bring you closer, inshallah, to that najat and salvation. Because at the end of the day, you and I don't know what will make the difference. We don't know, really. There's no certainty in that. And at least we come here, we get to pray, we get to do their ibadat. So don't stop coming, inshallah. This is just my humble advice to someone who came to this religion later in life and discovered this later in life, this blessings. I didn't have the opportunity to be born like you and to have this from my birth, right? So, alhamdulillah, you've had more opportunities to participate in these things, inshallah ta'ala. So if you have any questions, not fiqh related. Fiqh is for your resident alim. I don't get involved in those matters. You have a resident alim here at Idara, so those generally fiqh related issues, I don't entertain them because you have a resident scholar. So it's not my role to answer those questions. But something related to the majalis, related to Imam Hussein, Azza, Aqaid, Akhlaq, ethics, beliefs, ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome, please. The sisters or the brothers, that's why they both are here. So we have about 15 minutes, 20 minutes for questions. Yes, Bismillah. Oh, you have okay, we'll go to the sisters first. I've had FaceTime with you brothers for 2 weeks. So yes, sister. Wa alaikum salam. It's a very good question you ask about that, right? There is some differences of opinion about that. Some say that the head was brought on Arba'een, right? So that one of the things is that when Ahlul Bayt were returning from Sham, they requested the head of Imam Hussein from Yazid. And then they returned him. The whole question is, did they return that year or the next year? On the 40th. The 40th is important. There's no doubt about the fact that the 40th is important. But was it that year or the next year? Historians have different narrations. But one important thing about this was that the head of Hussein was repatriated to the body. That we have narrations that they requested that back. The head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Yeah. So we are confident that it was repatriated to the body of the Imam in Karbala. Yeah. Ji.
Why do we have in our own literatures controversy whether they were imprisoned for a
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good question. And see if I can check the reference here while I have it. I have the reference with me. We have again different narrations about this. Some narrations say that they were put in prison, and then there was an outcry about this prison, and they were, without any shade, and things were getting very terrible for them. And at that point, they were released quite quickly, because you see, the impact of keeping those women and children in prison for a year. I mean, as it is, the situation in Damascus was becoming difficult for Yazid having Ahlul Bayt there. It actually was not in his interest to keep them any longer, because it was causing a disturbance for his own self. So there are different narrations about it, whether it was a year, whether it was a month, whether it was a few days. What we do know is the narrations tell us that the conditions were terrible. The initial conditions were terrible. They were later moved, we know. According to several narrations, they were moved later to somewhere closer to the palace. But the initial conditions were basically they had no cover, their skin was peeling. It was a terrible, very, very terrible conditions, and then eventually they had to be moved. Yeah.
Do you have any reference that any children of Bibi Kulthum died on the day of Ashura?
I would have to look that up there. So Bibi Kulthum, that would be then, who was her husband? Here we have a list of all the shuhada of Karbala that Allama Zanjani has included in his book. So from Kulthum then would be the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I have not seen anything from the children of Kulthum that were there. We know from Imam Hassan, Sayyidah Zainab, Rubab, Sayyidah Layla. We know, of course, Ali Akbar. From Kulthum, I can double check. I have not seen that she had. Yeah, I haven't seen anything about her husband or her children. I just, in Arbab al-Maqatil, we just read Sayyidah Kulthum on her own. She came out of the tent, she began to cry, she began to wail, but there was no mention of her children. Because in the most reliable maqatil, like these are the ones written by our great ulama, Najaf al-Ashraf and in Qum al-Muqaddasa, we don't have mention. Like they have a list of the shuhada, and again, all those lists differ, but I haven't myself come across the children of Sayyidah Kulthum. Yeah.
Were all the heads being, they were all severed then, and did they all return, all the heads, and were they buried in Ganj Shahida?
That was the request. So Ahlul Bayt requested all the heads to be repatriated to the bodies, but definitely the heads of the Hashemites were returned, of Banu Hashim, right? So of Imam, his children, right, were returned. And that was actually a point of contention, right, in the history. So Yazid at first refused, and Imam Zain al-Abidin had to go back and forth with him. And not only that, they also had, for example, the artifacts of Ahlul Bayt. They had, like, for example, the dress of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, because they stole everything. So whatever was with them, they stole, including the and actually the heads, according to Sayyid Bahr al-Ulum, and I think this is more probable, definitely, were cut post-mortem. Imams was different. But the predominant number of shuhada, remember, they're in the middle of battle. They don't have time to do that. Like, someone dies and they go on and they're fighting. But after, what made this worse is after everyone died. Sayyid Bahr al-Ulum and others, based on Tabari's narration, Abu Mikhnaf, Ibn Tawus, Khawarizmi, Ibn Shahr al-Shub, these are the early historians. It's narrated that they were cut post-mortem. So they said, go and collect them. Because they wanted to bring them to Ibn Ziyad, and from Ibn Ziyad to Yazid, yeah. We'll go to the sisters in the back. Yes, sister. Wa alaikum salam. Well, I think that, yeah, well, the question is a very good question from the sister, which is that if the recommendation, which it is to marry a spouse on the basis of her or his iman, then why do we have an example from the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt who married certain women that clearly, didn't have the best akhlaq, or at the very least, right? The answer to, well, first, in the case of the Prophet, we know that the Prophet was an exception in many, many matters, and he himself tells the people. For example, the Prophet could marry more wives than was allowed, right? Secondly, I think that at the very beginning of these marriages, they were not terrible. I think that this idea that they were terrible from the beginning, and this was, rotten from the very beginning, I think that things got bad over time, and they evolved over time into that situation. And thirdly, I think at the end of the day, when it comes especially to the marriage of certain wives of the Prophet, two I can think particularly we know, those had to be done strategically in order to keep the Arab tribes together. And his sincere hope was that he would guide them, though. We read traditions, and he doesn't recommend us to do that in that case, right? Those are the cases in which the imams, and we read very clearly that the Prophet is an istithna, that he's that this example, that this is rather a exception, right? This is an exception at that very particular time. It's just like Imam Ali, for example, like after the death of the Prophet, eventually he had to even assist the people that were responsible for killing Sayyidah Zahra. He had to advise them in matters of court, in matters of judgment, in matters of different things, even though his blood was boiling within, because the responsibilities of the hujjat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not our same responsibilities. So for example, we don't have the responsibility to go and towards martyrdom with our babies and our children with us. That is a responsibility for Imam Hussein, because he was the Imam of the time, and the takalif of the imamah, the obligations of the imamah, and the one who has the wilayah are different from our obligations in certain very limited circumstances. And this is an example for the Prophet, where he married those two women to unite those tribes, to unite the Arabs under him. And also, if he did not, it would have created a lot of problems with their fathers as well. And that was a decision that he had to make at that time. But yet then throughout his life, he had hope in them. I mean, that's also the beauty of the character of the Prophet. I think it also teaches us how he dealt with very, very unideal situations. For example, one of those wives, who was very young when he married her, as she got older, every time Sayyidah Zahra would bring food, she would throw it on the floor, break plates, and the Prophet would get up, get on his hands and knees, clean the home. We have many narrations to this effect, that he would do this. What is he teaching husbands and wives and husbands? Him yelling and screaming and smacking, na'udhu billah, that is not the way of dealing with such situations. He is uswatun hasana. He is the best and most beautiful example in all these situations. So there are divine wisdoms in why the Prophet did that. But that I wouldn't say is from his sunnah. And we know this very clearly when the Ahlul Bayt were asked about these kinds of things. So the Imam and the Prophet as a ma'asum has certain responsibilities that we don't have. Yeah, I don't know if that helps answer the question a little bit, but it is a perennial question. Inshallah, if we meet when the Imam comes back, we can ask him, and I'm sure he will give us a very complete and full answer, I'm sure, which will satisfy every Muslim. Yeah.
Coming back to the previous question, when they used first chair or the first chair room or the second chair room, the distance from the Karbala to Sham, and they were traveling only daytime, and some of, all of them, they don't have camels to sit, some of them was walking. So when we look at the distance, and we have riwayat that even they stay a couple days outside. So if you calculate this all thing, how it is possible that they release on first year?
That's why the ulama of hadith discuss this issue. This is by no means a consensus by the historians for the very reason that you've just mentioned, right? So the question is it that year or the following 40th that they returned? We know the 40th is important, and we have a riwayah in Bisharat al-Mustafa of a Tabari, a Shi'i. There's a Sunni Tabari and a Shia Tabari, which narrates that Jabir came on the 40th and he was met by the Ahlul Bayt. But it doesn't necessarily say immediately after. So the question is, was it that year or was it the following year that they met Jabir? There was a meeting with Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari. I mean, the narration is in a 5th, 6th century source. It's early enough, the narration. So that's what I relate. As for the exact chronology of events, we're unsure. Sayyid ibn Tawus al-Hindi, one of our great ulama, no one would dispute with me here about Sayyid ibn Tawus, a very famous historian, one of the great historians of Hillah in Iraq, died in 660, 664 Hijrah, around that time. He also brings up the same issue about how long it would take for them to come back. Allama Majlisi has some different opinions on that issue. So this is not a matter of aqidah, it's not a matter of belief, it's not a matter of you're with us or against, something. These are historical matters of traveling and time and speed, and there is uncertainty on these issues. So yeah.
With all due respect, all the events have been, I mean, we are told that everything is accurate. And how come this controversy goes on? It's a big thing. I mean, it's 1 year is not a small span of time. We are not talking about 10 days or 15-day difference. You're talking about the whole year. So how come it stayed on? Because rest of it is authenticated. We know that
Yes,
the dates and so forth.
Or some narrations state that on this day in Safar is their return to Medina, right? I would say the stronger narrations indicate that, right? That it was a return to Medina. They returned to Medina on this date because that was recorded by the historians, right? I think one of the things that we have to realize, and I'm not going to give say that this is what my 100% belief is. What I will say, because you can refer to my writings and things to that effect, and we can have a mubahatha about those things in an academic classroom. But what I will say is, mu'mineen, you have to understand, these events took place a long time ago, and there are different narrations about them. Right? There's a narration of Abu Mikhnaf, narration of Khawarizmi, the narration of, found in Saduq. There's many narrations about these things. What the great scholars try to present, by great scholars I mean Sayyid Bahr al-Ulum, Sayyid Muhammad Sayyid al-Jalali, Ayatollah Jafar Subhani, these are great scholars, Sheikh Yusuf al-Gharawi. These are the who's who, the great scholars of Arbab al-Maqatil, okay? Sheikh Tabsi and Qum. Try to bring all the details together based on the earliest sources, present something, and then say, okay, this is the alternative to that. But the alternatives are not too great. The problem is on the listener's end when they do taqdees of every detail. And they say every detail is sacred at every moment, and if somebody goes off the script by one letter, we're going to na'udhu billah, I'm not saying physically hang, I'm proverbial, I'm being metaphorical, okay? We're gonna kick him out or her out. They're banned, they're cancelled. Well, by that case, every single alim, I think, in Najaf and Qum would be cancelled by now of our Maraja Kiram. I mean, then cancel them first. I mean, we follow the great scholars of Islam, Like I said, I have their books here. Nobody would dispute them in terms of their piety and their knowledge. That they've spent their life studying these details, and even they don't know every single detail. Even they don't know. No one can know. It's some of these details we cannot know. We have different narrations about them, and we try our best to narrate what the best of it that we can. But what we do know is so heartbreaking. It's so earth-shattering. It's so life-changing that that's sufficient. Right? And that's why mu'mineen should not fixate over particular things, but look at the grand picture of the musibat of Imam Hussein, what happened to him, and that it was a tragedy. Were the women taken prisoner? Yes. Were the women assaulted? Yes. Were the women hurt in ways that are terrible for Ahlul Bayt? Yes. There's nobody disputes that. La Sunni wa la Shia. Nobody debates that. But the exact precise chronology of where they landed on which day in the middle of the desert, with who's narrating all these things always, right? These things are narrated later sometimes about where they went from which time. So different scholars have come up with different estimations about it. And in the Arab and the Persian community, because they've grown up with these things and they're used to this, it's in their language, they're used to slight differences. I think the Indo-Pakistani community sometimes can't handle that, not because there's something wrong with them, just because in their culture they weren't always kind of brought up in the environment of Hawza and knowing that different ulama have on some small issues, not on big issues, on small historical issues, have certain different things. I'm a historian, I write in history, I have certain findings in my work that may be different from other people, may disagree with me, and that's fine as long as someone has a manhaj, and I believe as long as they're quoting from a reputable, well-known authority. That's the important part. Yes.
Sheikh, just a quick point in what you said. Just like you're a historian, I'm a man of science, and it's really interesting that today we still don't know whether or not light is a particle or a wave. So you could think that that's a bigger issue, but we give that a pass, you know. But Sheikh, a question regarding Mukhtar. In your studies, whatever you come across, and I totally get that there may not be 100% accuracy or knowledge about this, but whatever you have come across, is there evidence to show that there was communication with Mukhtar and Imam Zain al-Abidin in being guided with his mission? I'm just curious what you may have come across.
We know that Mukhtar was seeking certainly the pleasure of Imam Zain al-Abidin. We know that Imam Zain al-Abidin was certainly happy with the outcome of what Mukhtar's ventures brought, which was seeking justice for the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. As for certifying everything that Mukhtar did, no, I don't think so. Mukhtar was a man of his own right. He was also he had certain political positions, certain religious positions on things. Nobody's making him an imam, a reporter of hadith, and this and that. But in what he did in terms of bringing justice to the Ahlul Bayt, in hunting down the killers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he is praiseworthy for that. And he has been praised for that. And it was a day of joy when he finally, brought Umar ibn Sa'ad, Shimr Khuli, and people like that to justice and made them face their sins. So from that angle, he is praiseworthy. But he's a very complex figure who's veiled in a lot of different layers of history. Again, it's people who bring simple solutions for these kinds of things are very like black and white. It's not black and white. But that part is in seeking justice for the Ahlul Bayt. That's black and white, yeah. In just a second, we'll go to the brother. The sisters? Yes, sister. Go ahead. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
The question is, what is the religious and historical significance of the Arba'in walk?
Yeah, so the Arba'in walk, as I mentioned, is based on walking itself is a sunnah for ziyarah. So every step that you take is reward. So you are encouraged to walk as much as possible to Imam Hussein. So it doesn't have to be from Najaf, it could be from Basra, right? It could be from somewhere else. This is based on Sunnah Mu'akkada, on an affirmed, highly recommended Sunnah, that is to walk barefooted, to walk in sadness, so on and so forth, to Imam Hussein alayhi salam is a part of our religion. This is one of the things there's no dispute about, okay? There's no dispute about these things. This is our belief as Imami Ithna Asharis, okay? Not about this person's and that person's opinion. No, these are the things that we're united on, right? In terms of our belief on walking, the Arba'in itself. We have a tradition from the 11th Imam that the ziyarah on the 40th is from the sign is a sign of a believer. And as I said, we have the riwayah in the Bisharat al-Mustafa about the 40th day, about them meeting Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. Actually, I don't remember if it mentions 40th there, but I believe it does. I have to double check the riwayah again. Nobody hold me to that for sure, as I don't have the book here. But the idea of them meeting Jabir ibn Abdullah, the idea of returning to Hussein ibn Ali, and the concept of 40th, of course, from the 11th Imam. And we have a ziyarah that is transmitted from the Ahlul Bayt for the 40th, that is narrated by Sheikh Tusi and some of the most famous, most authentic, most well-known ulama of the history of Shiism. So this is something that you can take to the bank. And I've written on that in my forthcoming book with Brill. You can read it in there in chapter 5 and chapter 6. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, wa alaikum assalam.
Would you be able to please shine some light on the Surah Fajr, the first few verses, where Allah has been taking the swears that wal fajr wal layalin ashr wal shaf'i wal watr wal layli idha yasr hal fi zalika qasam allazi hijr. So all those four vows that Allah has mentioned here, what do they mean with relation to Waqia Karbala? Thank you.
I have to look that up. I'm sure there is a ta'weed for that, for those verses, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And when it comes to the Quran, we have to be very careful. So I won't comment on that. Yeah, this brother had his hand. Yes, Dr. Shah, and then we'll come to you.
Why does the Sunni not accept the concept of Masumiyya?
The Sunnis don't accept the concept of Isma after the Prophet, right? So the Sunnis, large proportion of them can accept that the Prophet was Ma'asum. Disputed is after them, because for them, they don't interpret that verse from 33:33, right? Ayat Tathir in that way. But I would dispute with them, really. I mean, we don't call it Isma, fine. But then what do you call it? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifies them from every impurity, as Tabari narrates himself in his Tabari gives 17 narrations about this ayat of Tathir. He says it includes those 5 people. Only one riwayah Tabari brings about the wives of the Prophet, by the way. So out of the 17 narrations, 16 or 15 of those narrations have to do with those 5. And then Tabari himself, very well known, one of the earliest Sunni mufassirs of the Quran, died in, I think, in the early part of Ghaiba, right, around the early 300s of Hijrah, writes in there that it is that they're purified from every ma'asi and danas, from every disobedience and impurity. So what does that mean then? Okay, we don't call them ma'asum. Don't use the word ma'asum then, I'll tell Tabari. I'll say they're purified from every disobedience and uncleanliness. And he knows it's not physical cleanliness. So it is, I think sometimes it is a matter of semantics for them, because the Sufis believe them to be awliya of Allah. The Sufis believe them to have not ever done anything wrong. The Sufis believe every qawl of Ali al-Rida, every qawl of al-Baqir, of al-Sadiq, of al-Kadhim alayhim as-salam is hujjah. So if every qawl of theirs is a proof, don't call them Masum, fine. But they're your Qibla. Every single group of Mutasawwifin, of the Sufis. We have to see that. And then they ascribe to them wilaya. What is that wilaya? They are, the Imam is al-Insan al-Kamil. Okay, don't call it Masum then. He is the perfect human being. It is the same thing in a different words. But from the perspective of Islamic mysticism, we can arrive at that. From the mysticism of the Sunnis, right? Every single group of every single Sunni Sufi group, nearly every single one, nearly every single one, first of all, has the Imams in them. Many of them believe in the 12 Imams, by the way. But over time, because they lived in different places, they practiced different fiqh. But in their core beliefs about the Imams, their miracles, so on and so forth, it's almost the same as us. So I think that true Sunnism, if such a thing exists, can be found, true Sunnism from a Shia perspective, can be found in some elements of Sufism with regards to Ahlul Bayt, and there that ismat exists in a different way. Yeah.
One last question.
Yes. Oh, did the sisters have? Because I went to the brothers, so I have to be fair.
Yeah.
We'll give the last word to the sisters.
A few of the sisters. There's actually two questions. One question might be a little bit easier to answer, but who was the mother of Bibi Fatima Sughra? Islam was the first question. The second question is not related to that, but men can learn Islamic studies in depth from senior ulama. How can women also be able to learn from senior ulama or gain more in-depth knowledge when it comes to Islamic studies?
Well, I think that mashallah, at least in the West, I think women, mashallah, and men have access to the same teachers, right? For example, in the houses in the West, the good schools. And also in Qom, there's Jamiatul Zahra, which has some of the best teachers. I know Sheikh Muhammad Shumali, Muhammad Ali Shumali, Sheikh Shumali was teaching there and running the Hawza for many years, and the sisters had access to the best teachers. I know in Lebanon as well, mashallah, the sisters have access to very good teachers. Of course, there is the issue of hijab always, which is there, that is a little bit of that is a barrier in some senses, but overall, mashallah, I will definitely say in Qom, the sisters have access to the top knowledge. In Afghanistan, for example, we know that in Kabul, one of the largest houses in the Shia world is in Kabul. In Kabul has the highest number of women in the highest levels of studies in the world in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan. And this was told to me by the head Ayatollah Wa'izadeh himself. When I met him, he told me that one of the prides of Afghanistan is that we have the most female mujtahids. Studying at the Maqasid, Kifaya, Sutu al-Uliya, even above that, and they're teaching other people. So mashallah, there are parts of the world where our sisters, like I said in Afghanistan, have reached the highest levels of knowledge. We just don't hear about it because the media or for whatever reason, But alhamdulillah, our sisters have access to that education. It's not the same always, but they definitely do have access. I know in Qom and I know in Afghanistan, in Kabul, alhamdulillah. So we should not believe the media or those other things, yes.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. So this concludes the majlis. Inshallah, please get ready for salat. We'll have azan in 5 minutes, and inshallah, Maulana, we'd like to thank you from the community. Mashallah, your efforts were unbelievable, and we're indebted to you. May Allah bless you and your family. Inshallah, we'll have you back again, inshallah, in the future. And all the Mu'mineen keep have a chance to give Sheikh Maulana's hand. Inshallah, when you get a chance. Salawat wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.